My name is Clara Vance. I'm 34 years old, and for my entire life, I was known as the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who stayed behind in our quiet Ohio hometown while my younger sister, Evelyn, went off to Chicago to live what my family called a big, important life. If you asked anyone in our town who Clara was, they'd tell you I was the quiet elementary school teacher who never complained, never caused a scene, and spent every weekend taking care of our widowed mother, Eleanor. When my father died 8 years ago, I was the one who sorted through his medical bills, arranged the estate, and cooked dinner for my mother every single night for 6 months while she grieved. Evelyn couldn't come home for the funeral. She had a high-profile corporate retreat in Aspen that she just couldn't cancel. My family didn't hold it against her. In fact, they praised her for being so ambitious. Evelyn has so much pressure on her shoulders, my mother would always say, gently patting my arm. You understand, don't you, Clara? You're the strong one. You don't need the extra hand-holding. The strong one. It sounds like a compliment, doesn't it? But if you've ever been the strong one in a family, you know it isn't a compliment at all. It's an invoice. It means you get the responsibility while someone else gets the grace. I accepted that arrangement for 34 years. I swallowed my feelings, paid my own way through college, and built a modest, comfortable life with my husband, Mark. But last autumn, something happened that forced me to pull out the family ledger and do the math out loud. It started with a water leak. My mother's Victorian house was built in 1912. It's a beautiful, rambling home, but the roof had been giving out for years. Last October, after a heavy storm, water began seeping into the ceiling of the master bedroom. My mother called me in a panic at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Clara, the house is falling apart," she cried. "I don't have the money for a new roof. I'm living on a fixed pension." I immediately dropped everything. I called 3 local contractors, got quotes, and realized a full roof replacement would cost $18,000. My mother sat at her kitchen table, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I guess I'll just have to sell the house and move into a state-run facility," she sobbed softly. "I'm just a burden to everyone." Of course, I couldn't let that happen. Mark and I had been saving for 5 years to put a down payment on a small cabin near the lake, our dream project. But looking at my mother, I couldn't say no. I took $18,000 out of our private savings account and paid the contractor directly. When I told my sister Evelyn about it over the phone, expecting her to offer to split the cost, she let out a long sigh. "Oh, Clara, thank God you handled that. My mortgage on the condo just went up, and I'm trying to get Cooper into a private tennis academy. You know how expensive Chicago is. I'm so glad you have the flexibility to help Mom." Flexibility. That was the word she used for my life savings. A week later, the contractors started ripping up the old shingles on the roof. Because water had dripped into the attic, the workers asked me to go up there and move some old storage boxes away from the northern wall so they wouldn't get water damage. I went up to the attic on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The air smelled of old paper, dried lavender, and damp oak. I began moving dusty plastic tubs filled with old Christmas decorations and high school yearbooks. Tucked behind a heavy cedar chest in the dark corner of the attic, I found an old, iron-bound wooden trunk. It was locked with a small brass padlock. I had never seen it before. Curiously, the key was sitting right on top of a nearby rafters, covered in cobwebs. I unlocked the trunk. Inside were dozens of thick, leather-bound financial ledgers and legal envelopes going back 20 years. My father had been a meticulous man. He was a small-town pharmacist, but he recorded every single dollar that came in and out of his household. Curious, I opened the ledger labeled Family Assets and Loans, 2012 to present. As I flipped through the yellowed pages in my father's precise, neat handwriting, my heart slowly sank into my stomach. In 2014, when I was struggling to pay off my student loans while working 2 part-time teaching jobs. I had asked my father for a $3,000 loan. He had told me, very gently, that the family was tight on cash and that I needed to be independent. I accepted it and worked night shifts at a diner for 2 years to clear my debt. But according to the ledger in my hands, in that exact same month, October 2014, my parents had wired $45,000 to Evelyn to cover her luxury apartment deposit in downtown Chicago. It wasn't listed as a loan. It was marked gift. I kept reading, page after page, year after year. 2016, $60,000 for Evelyn's dream wedding in Napa Valley. When I got married to Mark in 2018, my parents gave us a $500 toaster oven and a sweet card. 2019, $85,000 down payment for Evelyn's condo. 2021, $30,000 to cover Evelyn's credit card debt after her boutique clothing venture failed. And then I reached the most recent entries, written in my mother's shaky, loose handwriting after my father passed away. 6 months ago, just 3 weeks before my mother cried at her kitchen table, claiming she didn't have a single penny to fix the leaking roof, my mother had taken out a $150,000 home equity loan against the house. And where had that $150,000 gone? Glued to the ledger page was a wire transfer receipt to Evelyn's personal bank account, dated September 14th. The memo line read, "For Evelyn's new Porsche and Cooper's Tennis Academy." I sat on the dusty floor of that cold attic, surrounded by the smell of rain, holding the physical proof of my own invisibility. My mother didn't lack money. She had $150,000. She had given it all to my sister for a luxury sports car and private sports lessons, and then she had looked her reliable daughter in the eye and let me drain my life savings to pay for her roof. I didn't cry. Something inside me, the quiet, accommodating part of me that had spent 34 years pleasing everyone, simply clicked off. It was replaced by a cold, sharp, mathematical clarity. I took out my smartphone and photographed every single page of the ledger. I photographed the bank wire receipts, the tax documents, and the home equity loan papers. Then I locked the trunk, put the key back on the rafter, and walked downstairs. I didn't confront my mother that day. I knew how my family worked. If I confronted her alone, she would cry, call Evelyn, and within an hour the narrative machine would start. I would be accused of spying, being jealous, and disrespecting my dead father's memory. In my family, the crime is never the betrayal. The crime is talking about the betrayal out loud. So I waited. I played the long game. The perfect opportunity arrived 3 weeks later, Thanksgiving dinner. Every year, my mother hosted Thanksgiving at her house. Evelyn and her husband, Richard, drove down from Chicago in her shiny new black Porsche. My Aunt Sarah and Uncle Bob came from town. It was the one day of the year when the whole family gathered under one roof to celebrate how blessed and close we all were. I arrived early to help my mother cook. She was in high spirits, showing off the new roof to Aunt Sarah. Clara was such a dear to organize the workers, my mother said smoothly, patting my shoulder. Notice how she framed it? I organized the workers. She completely omitted the fact that I had paid $18,000 out of my own pocket. I just smiled and basted the turkey. By 6 p.m., we were all seated around the massive mahogany dining table. The table was covered in crystal glasses, silver platters, and fine china. Evelyn was holding court, bragging about Cooper's tennis coach and showing everyone photos of her new condo renovation. "It's just so exhausting," Evelyn sighed, taking a sip of expensive red wine. "Maintaining 2 properties and keeping up with the kids' schedules. Sometimes I wish I had a simpler life, like yours, Clara. Just teaching 3rd grade and staying in town. It must be so relaxing not having to worry about big financial pressure. Mark, sitting next to me, squeezed my hand under the table. He knew everything. He had seen the photos from the attic. My mother beamed at Evelyn. "Well, sweetie, you were born for big things. We're all so proud of you." I cleared my throat softly. I set my fork down on my plate. The clinking of silverware stopped. "Speaking of finances, Evelyn," I said, my voice calm, steady, and perfectly pleasant. "How is the new Porsche treating you? The leather seats look wonderful in the driveway." Evelyn froze for a microsecond, then laughed nervously. "Oh, it's great. Richard and I worked really hard to reward ourselves this year." "Did you?" I asked, tilting my head. "That's interesting, because according to the wire transfer from Mom's bank account on September 14th, Mom paid for that Porsche using the $150,000 home equity loan she took out on this house." The entire dining room went dead silent. Aunt Sarah stopped chewing her stuffing. Uncle Bob looked up from his wineglass. My mother's face drained of all color, turning as white as the linen napkin in her lap. "Clara," my mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "What on earth are you talking about? Have you been drinking?" "No, Mom," I said smoothly. "I haven't had a drop. I'm talking about the $150,000 you wired to Evelyn 3 weeks before you sat at your kitchen table, cried into a tissue, and told me you were broke and would have to move into a nursing home if I didn't pay $18,000 for your roof." "Clara, shut up!" Evelyn snapped, slamming her glass down on the table, wine sloshing over the tablecloth. "You have no right to talk about Mom's personal finances. You're making a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Evelyn. I'm doing the accounting," I replied. I reached into my handbag under my chair and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were 7 neatly printed copies of the attic ledger, the bank receipts, and the roof invoice. I stood up and calmly handed a copy to Aunt Sarah, a copy to Uncle Bob, a copy to Evelyn, and placed one right in front of my mother. "What is this?" Evelyn yelled, her face flushing bright red. "Are you crazy?" "That is a complete itemized audit of this family for the last 12 years, I said, standing at the head of the table. "You see, for 34 years, I was told that I was the strong one. I was told that I didn't need help, didn't need gifts, and didn't need support because Evelyn needed it more. But looking at these numbers, I realized something very important. I looked directly into my mother's trembling eyes. I wasn't the strong one, Mom. I was the unpaid staff. I was the safety net you used so you could bankroll Evelyn's luxury lifestyle without ever having to face financial consequences." Aunt Sarah was staring at the paper in her hands, her jaw dropped. "Eleanor, you gave Evelyn $150,000 while Clara paid for your roof? Sarah, don't look at that. Clara stole those documents," my mother shrieked, tears finally bursting from her eyes. "Clara, how could you do this to your own family on Thanksgiving, after everything I've done for you?" "What have you done for me, Mom?" I asked softly. "Name one thing on this ledger that you've done for me in the last 10 years. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at Evelyn, waiting for her favorite daughter to defend her. Evelyn stood up, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You're just bitter, Clara. You're jealous because I made something of my life, and you stayed in this pathetic little town. You're trying to ruin Mom's health over a few dollars." $18,000, Evelyn, I corrected her, and $180,000 over the last decade. That's not a few dollars. That's my husband's and my future. I picked up my purse and looked around the table. My mother was sobbing hysterically, covering her face. Evelyn was screaming at Aunt Sarah to give the papers back. Uncle Bob was staring at his plate in utter embarrassment. "I'm leaving now," I said quietly. "Mark and I are going home to eat pizza." "If you walk out that door, Clara, My mother wailed through her tears. "Don't you ever come back. You are destroying this family." I paused at the doorway of the dining room. I turned around and looked at them one last time. The mother who used me, the sister who bled us dry, and the relatives who had turned a blind eye for decades. "I didn't destroy this family, Mom," I said softly. "I just stopped paying for its foundation. Happy Thanksgiving." Mark and I walked out into the crisp November air, got into our car, and drove away. Within 20 minutes of leaving the house, my phone started exploding. Text messages, voicemails, missed calls. 12 missed calls from Evelyn, 8 from my mother, 4 from various cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. The family group chat was a war zone. "How could you attack Mom like that?" "You're evil, Clara." "Evelyn needed that money for her family, you selfish witch." I didn't reply to a single text. I didn't answer a single call. Instead, I opened the group chat, sent one final message containing a PDF of the entire ledger, and typed, "The bank is permanently closed. Do not contact me again." Then, I blocked every single one of them. 2 days later, I hired a civil lawyer. Since I had paid the roof contractor directly from my personal bank account, under the verbal agreement that it was an emergency loan for my mother's primary residence, my lawyer sent my mother a formal legal notice demanding full reimbursement of the $18,000 within 30 days, or we would place a legal lien against her house. When the legal notice arrived, my mother realized I wasn't playing games anymore. She didn't have the cash left to pay me. Evelyn had already spent most of the $150,000 on her sports car and designer furniture. To avoid a public lawsuit and a lien on her precious house, my mother was forced to sell her beloved Victorian home and downsize into a small, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. Evelyn refused to let my mother move in with her in Chicago, claiming her condo didn't have enough guest space. The $18,000 was returned to Mark and my savings account 3 months later. It's been almost a year since that Thanksgiving night. I haven't spoken to my mother or my sister since. Occasionally, Aunt Sarah texts me to update me on the family drama, how Evelyn and my mother are now constantly fighting over money, and how my mother complains to anyone who will listen that she lost her youngest daughter to greed. I don't care anymore. Mark and I finally bought our dream cabin near the lake last spring. On weekends, I sit on the porch with a cup of hot coffee, listening to the quiet rustle of the pine trees, far away from the screaming, the manipulation, and the fake family harmony. For 34 years, I thought being the strong one meant enduring pain in silence so everyone else could stay comfortable. I was wrong. Being strong doesn't mean carrying everyone else's debt. Being strong means having the courage to put down the heavy load, walk away from the table, and let the people who spent your life finally pay their own